welcome again. I'm going to introduce our first featured poet for the evening, and we will have a Q&A after both poets have read. So as I said, if you keep your questions for then, and you can also put comments and questions into the chat anytime during the presentation. Becka Mara McKay, it's such a pleasure to introduce her. I don't know, it's been a long time that we've been going and we haven't had her here. And I said to Becka, how did we not have you already? So we need to correct this error on our part and get you in here. And I hope to have you come back many times. Becka Mara McKay directs the Creative Writing MFA at Florida Atlantic University, where she serves as faculty advisor to Swamp Ape Review. Love that name. Her recent work has appeared in Muzzle, Spoon River Poetry Review, Southwest Review, and Permafrost. Her newest book of poems is The Little Book of No Consolation, published by Barrow Street Press. And with no further ado, I will turn the stage over to you, Becka. Thank you.
Thank you. So you can all hear me fine? Okay, good. I'm starting the clock so that I can try to keep track of time. Thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting to be here in my own house with all of you, though. This is my newest book, The Little Book of No Consolation. I'm going to read some things from this, and then I'm also going to read some new work. This book is divided into sections, and each section is named after a word from what I call the Dictionary of Misremembered English. They're actually from a calendar that a former student gave me that was called the Dictionary of Forgotten English. And every day for a year, I would do my morning writing based on the words, right? I mean, I still have the words everywhere in little, like I kept them, right? Like this one is yellowness. That seems like it should still be a word. So anyway, the first word in the book is graveyard working, which was a social gathering for the purpose of cleaning a cemetery. Years ago, I was a room, unprepared for the renovations. The trap door of my body unlatched and all the blueprints burned. A cloud is a room for holding tomorrow's weather. The sky is a room for the education of orioles. A bell is a room for warnings, and ashes are a room for the detonator's dirge. And so the explosions I escaped in Jerusalem moved in next door to haunt me. A cemetery is a room. The sea with its whales is the room after that. I think these tabs would make it easier to turn the pages, but it feels not. So I also have a series of poems in this book that are based on the Latin names of animals. So this one is called Pseudocris triceriata as mistranslation. Pseudocris triceriata is a kind of frog. The family to my west is immense with exile. Every morning, the matriarch's mother-in-law, her face a cradle of bone and protest, sings litanies to God or to the flight paths, whichever appears closer. Sieved with disbelief, I pretend she can send anything winged to peel me from sleep, so that my dreams are a rash of interrupted color. Last night, her driveway was migrating, spasms of tarry pebbles trying to marry my hedges, until I knelt in the light's late web and saw hundreds of tiny frogs, rough beads reassessing their relationship with gravity. One jumped to my palm and froze, so acute with stillness, I was ashamed, and laid it in the weeds that erupt in green knuckles of forgiveness, as though preparing for this clash of convergence and flight, finally able to bear the weight of fresh exodus. This is another one of those poems is called Pakari Tajaku as mistranslation. Pakari Tajaku is the Latin name for javelina. And the desert in this poem is not actually the Mojave, it's the Sonora, but I didn't realize that until it was too late. The javelina is a narrower animal than you expected based on its lineage, distant cousin to the domesticated pig, or from your first glimpse of it leaning against a wire fence in papery light, a furred football, stubbed legs tucked under its belly, caught in conversation with the dust. But when it rises to face you head on, all the laws of dimension, always a challenge for you and your tethered vision, are suspended. This is a creature designed for downtown parking or for the useless space between refrigerator and sink. Too shallow for storage, too short for appliance. Every part of the javelina is desert-hued except for the end of its flat and animate snout, pink and naked as your latest scar. Dear sir, your letter to the desert would have said before you met the desert's best specimen, I am wary of any place that has the power to kill me with its breath. But now you know the Mojave grows its own jokes, like any biome with enough time on its hands. And you understand the mystery in this distance, even with your flawed eyes flattening everything into tapestry and screenshot. I have learned nothing from deer despite their best efforts. Caught, taut, and burning with cold, I spied a stag loping through the hip-high snow, careless as a trout slicing water, or a wire slicing skin. I didn't know what muscle meant until I witnessed this briefest battle between animal object and inanimate weather. This was years before our car took out a doe on the interstate, leaving us leaking everything. I admit I ordered venison that night, letting my teeth meet both sides of a bone, barbecued and juicy. And later still and farther from the country's spine, I found a yearling trapped in the tines of a fence, suspended and unready to be eaten. Her legs kept up their clockwork, but couldn't reach the ground. Her companions, catching panic, raced past, their tails like little lights that meant to say, this way, but really said goodbye. This is Echna umbrosa as mistranslation. That's a kind of firefly. The cardinal isn't eating plastic as I first believed, but removing the wings of a dragonfly she caught for breakfast. She chats in bright chimes while she swallows her prey, part pride, part warning. In every season here, animals pin desire to my window. One snow blue night, a buck showed up to take his shot at the suet and seeds, the moon losing itself in the late velvet of his antlers. He froze a moment in the slap of motion lights, his tongue muscling inside the feeder as thin ghosts of steam left his body. I don't know what he stood for. Maybe he stood for nothing but his own hunger, like the cardinal pleased to pluck glass wings from the dragonfly and discard them, transparent as air. They flap back and forth like pages from a book the cardinal means to read as soon as she returns. This is the title poem. Well, sort of the title poem. The Little Book of No Consolation. What's the first thing you'll tell God when you get a chance? I ask my uncle. His hands are square as sandwiches, and he examines them with astonished grief, as though they've become lazy dragons napping next to his wrists. Twice a day, the sun's slant turns every wall in Jerusalem into God's forge. sudden gold masquerading as the source of all misery or all mercy. He notices me waiting behind his hands and dismisses them with a shake. Why would God give me another chance? I hope we have pockets in the afterlife, so we won't have to spend eternity learning to separate coins and lint from lists and licorice. This is also from the Dictionary of Misremembered English. It's called Donkey's Breakfast, which is a straw mattress in a sailor's bunk, which makes sense. We slept on straw when straw was safer than the ground, believing the body's final home has power. We slept on the ground when the ground was safer than the trees, believing in bone and ash and the last place the body makes itself comfortable. We slept in the trees to escape the jaws of our enemies, honoring the last place the body faced its fears. We slept in the jaws of our enemies to understand hunger. We mark the last place the body removes its shoes or holds another body or pays attention to the other bodies all around. We slept in hunger when we sought God. We remember the last place the body gives up, the last place the body rests, tree or tomb or miles below the sea's green burden. When we were finished, we slept in God. A brief guide to the firmament. Fresh angels are terrible diagnosticians. You know the old saying, the fresher the angel, the worse the prognosis. It has something to do with their new noses, or maybe the way their wings push so much truth toward their faces. It is not easy to be a new angel. The technology of heaven is decades behind. The only medical supplies are reserved for the harpists who slice open their fingers. The older angels, of course, can play chords in their sleep, and they do, so that all the halls of paradise are lined with the music of slumbering ghosts. Son, you'll understand when you're older, are words that are never heard in the afterlife. Also, do you want to get out here and I'll go park the car? Small gallantries are unacceptable currency in heaven. The valet says, sleep, my angels, sleep. So that is actually the last poem in my book. So I'm going to read a few new ones. One way I get around having to come up with a title, because it's very difficult to come up with titles, is I just, run. There's probably a poetic term for it, and I should probably know it because I teach creative writing, but the title just runs into the first line. If cruelty is the syntax of power, then last night's teeth, unseen and strict, were the last grammar lesson of a pregnant rabbit who left behind nothing but her liver and a pale fetus roughly the shape and size of my thumb. So much of survival relies on a violence we never witness until it is spelled out on blood-stained pavement. I stuffed my alarm back into my mouth like every bad idea I found the grace not to speak out loud. Almost on cue, a pair of loons began narrating these events to each other in detailed hysteria while crossing overhead. Loon calls will convince anyone the sky is burning. Already they've persuaded my skin to pull itself into goosebumps. Like God's name, the loon call belongs in my ears, but never on my tongue. If the forbidden is the syntax of the holy, then coyotes are the day's high priests, sharp grins hidden. Above the loons, vultures wobble and dip. What remains after a killing is the syntax of vultures, who are themselves a language I'm still learning to translate. This is called Origin Story, because every superhero needs an origin story. 1,000 miles from my window, chickadees herald their own deities in prayers like elastic versions of their alarms. 2 notes that mean here soon, or home now.
Aha, I'm here.
Maybe all heralds, when compressed, become warnings, like the panic that told the lizard to kiss my thumb with all his teeth before I could free him from my house. It didn't hurt. Now you're a lizard too, predicted my wisest friend. Maybe, but only under the new moon's missing face, or when the lizards are in trouble, trapped in attics or scrabbling in tubs and exhausted from struggle. No memory of the hole they squeezed through to get there. So a lot of the poems in my new manuscript are about the 613 commandments, which are the 500 and, oh God, I'm doing math in front of people. It's the 603 commandments that come after the 10 commandments, although they're not in that order. But I became obsessed with these commandments and wrote many poems about them. And then sort of in the middle of putting together this book, both my stepmother and my uncle, my aunt's husband and my father's brother-in-law, they died right before the pandemic started, about a week apart. And I found myself writing poems about that instead. And so in the manuscript, there's this kind of interruption that starts to happen. And so this is one of the poems that I wrote about my stepmother. It's called Everything Done with the Utmost Respect. My stepmother donated her body to science. So when she died, science took her body away. When science finished with her body, they burned it to ashes, put the ashes in a box, and returned them to my father. He says next summer we'll scatter them near the falls. Whatever isn't prayer will masquerade as prayer by clasping its hands tight to whiten the knuckles, the breath of an unknown country in the throat. I know why we don't speak ill of the dead. They're listening in the mirrors, bending light to catch our slander, the way a bat bends sound to catch a moth in flight. And then actually, I wrote a poem after. I didn't realize that this was sort of a sequel to this poem. But I wrote a poem after we actually did Scatter the Ashes. We did it in Minnehaha Creek in Minnesota. And, you know, we had to put it off because of the pandemic. And we put it off long enough that I actually was able to read that poem while we did that, which I thought was nice. I think everybody thought it was nice. So this is called Poem as the Urn's Last Act. I had to see the ashes leaving with the current before I understood how determined ash could be, arranging its edges into efficiency and twisting toward the falls. Despite the bright sun, the moon was still a small dependency on the sky, like bait waiting for the bent discipline of a hook. Soon, the ash would be temptation for the fish, and the fish would become desire for the herons probing their own reflections in the shallows. The trees in their emptiness would embrace each heron carried by hunger across the low sun, a moment of startling shadow cutting through our late wishes, a pause carved out by the possibilities inside this movement, ashes arrowing away from us to seek the water's jaws. And that's it. That's all I'm going to read. So thank you for your clapping hands and
Thank
for
you,
your
Becca.
attention.
It's really hard, I know, for poets to hear and see the reaction, but I could tell from what's in the chat and the way everybody's clapping that those poems really hit home. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.